Emily Johnson slammed her silver sedan into 3 cars in broad daylight, then raced home to her mother, Linda, who tried to hide both her and the wrecked vehicle. What seemed like a reckless accident quickly spiraled into a chilling story of secrets, cover-ups, and the dangerous bond between a daughter and the mother who would do anything to protect her. The neighborhood was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary, a stretch of calm streets lined with trimmed hedges, parked cars, and children's bicycles scattered on driveways. That quiet routine shattered in seconds when a piercing crash rang out, loud enough to draw people from their porches and living rooms. A silver sedan had come tearing down the narrow street like a bullet, swerving left and right as if the driver had no control or perhaps no intention of slowing down. Tires screeched against the asphalt, leaving jagged black marks that curved across the road. The first impact came fast. The car sideswiped a white hatchback parked neatly along the curb. Metal crunched, mirrors snapped off, and shards scattered across the ground. But the vehicle didn't stop there. Momentum pushed it forward, grinding the sedan's fender into the side of a second car, this one a small SUV, leaving long, ugly scars across the paint. Before anyone had time to process what they were witnessing, the third collision happened. The sedan plowed directly into the back of a parked sedan, with a force so violent that alarms began wailing, echoing down the street like warning sirens. Neighbors froze for a moment, stunned by the chaos unraveling in front of them. Some instinctively pulled out their phones while others shouted, pointing at the vehicle. But what was most shocking was not the string of accidents. It was what happened next. Instead of stepping out to check the damage or call for help, the driver hit the brakes for only a second, then slammed the car into reverse. The silver sedan jolted backward with reckless speed, narrowly missing a mailbox, before lurching forward again in a frantic attempt to flee the scene. Smoke puffed from the tires as the car accelerated, zigzagging down the street until it disappeared around the corner. Witnesses caught glimpses of the driver in those brief, chaotic seconds. A young woman, her hair loose and wild, gripped the steering wheel tightly, her face pale and tense, her eyes darting around with a look of fear mixed with determination. Some swore she looked like she was running from more than just the consequences of an accident. Others said the way she handled the car, the way she refused to hesitate, suggested she had already decided to escape before the first crash even happened. It was not the behavior of someone shocked or panicked by a mistake. It felt deliberate, as if she had no intention of staying behind to face the wreckage she left. By the time the alarms faded into the distance, all that remained was a street full of stunned residents and 3 badly damaged vehicles. The air carried the sharp scent of burnt rubber and shattered plastic. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering warnings about what they had just seen. Calls to emergency services poured in, each one describing the same bizarre scene. A reckless young woman who hit car after car, then sped off without a trace. The once ordinary street had suddenly become the stage for an act of reckless destruction, one that no one could yet explain. Police sirens broke the uneasy silence not long after the crashes. Officers rolled into the neighborhood, with flashing lights reflecting off the damaged vehicles, their radios crackling with updates from dispatch. Crowds of residents pointed in the direction the silver sedan had fled, each eager to share what they had seen. Statements came quickly. A young woman, early 20s, long dark hair, pale expression, speeding away as if she were escaping more than a few smashed cars. The officers noted how many witnesses described the same thing, a look of desperation etched into her face. One officer muttered that she didn't look lost or confused. She looked like she knew exactly where she was going. The investigation started with urgency. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, collecting bits of evidence from the street. Broken plastic, shards of glass, and chunks of paint scraped off the sedan's body. They measured the skid marks, long and jagged, proof of how wildly the car had been handled. The sound of wailing car alarms lingered, broken only by the murmurs of neighbors still shaken by what they had seen. Some residents compared the scene to a movie chase, except this wasn't a stunt. It was real damage, real fear, and a real driver who had vanished. Traffic cameras became the next piece of the puzzle. Within an hour, footage surfaced showing the silver sedan whipping around a corner and heading toward a quieter part of town. The grainy video captured only a glimpse of the woman behind the wheel, her hands clenched tight, her posture stiff. What unsettled the officers was her speed and her confidence. She wasn't driving aimlessly, circling streets in panic. She was making a beeline toward somewhere familiar. That suggested planning, not a moment of chaos. As detectives traced her path, they noticed something peculiar. Instead of taking the main road out of the neighborhood, she veered toward a small cul-de-sac tucked behind a row of maple trees. It wasn't a through street. In fact, it ended abruptly, with only a handful of houses at the end. To most, it was a dead end. But to her, it was a destination. This raised questions. Why would someone trying to escape choose a road that led nowhere? Unless, of course, there was something or someone waiting at the end of it. The randomness of the victims added another layer of confusion. The three cars struck had no connection to each other. They belonged to ordinary families who had no link to the young woman. There was no sign she targeted anyone specifically, and yet, the deliberate way she disappeared suggested intent. Officers began to wonder if the crashes weren't the point at all, but rather a distraction or a build-up to something else. While tow trucks hauled away the wrecked vehicles, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Some said the woman must have been drunk or high. Others whispered about her being on the run from the law or fleeing a personal crisis. To the police, one thing was clear. She hadn't simply vanished into thin air. She had driven into that cul-de-sac for a reason, and whatever waited at the end of that street was about to pull this case into darker, stranger territory. The cul-de-sac where the silver sedan disappeared was quiet, almost unnervingly so, as detectives rolled in to investigate. The street was lined with only a few houses, each with manicured lawns and driveways that suggested routine suburban peace. Yet beneath the stillness, something felt off. Tire marks streaked across the pavement, ending in front of a modest, beige two-story home with closed curtains and a garage door that seemed recently shut. The marks told their own story. The car had come here at high speed, brakes slammed hard just before it pulled inside. For detectives, it was as though the street itself pointed a finger toward the house. The home belonged to a woman in her 50s, known around the neighborhood for being overly protective of her daughter. She kept to herself most of the time, but when it came to her family, her presence was always felt. Neighbors had often remarked that the daughter, a troubled young woman, leaned heavily on her mother to solve problems others would have had to face alone. From overdue bills to small legal troubles, it was always the mother who appeared, smoothing things over with a firm tone and a quick explanation. This reputation made the sudden silence from the house more suspicious. Detectives knocked on the door. After a long pause, the mother finally appeared. Her expression calm, almost too calm given the chaos just blocks away. She insisted she had been home all day and hadn't heard anything unusual. Behind her, the faint scent of rubber seemed to cling to the air, a detail the officers quietly noted. She stood in the doorway, firm and unyielding, as though guarding whatever secrets lay inside. The silver sedan wasn't in plain sight, but the fresh tire tracks leading into the garage were undeniable. The investigators exchanged glances. If the driver had run here after the crash, then the mother's story was already unraveling. As officers lingered outside, neighbors cautiously stepped forward to share what they had seen. One reported watching the sedan speed into the driveway minutes after the accidents. Another claimed the garage door closed almost immediately, as if someone inside had been waiting to hide the car. There were no raised voices, no commotion, only the eerie impression of a plan carried out with precision. The more the detectives listened, the clearer it became that this was not simply a young woman panicking and rushing home. It looked like an arrangement between mother and daughter, a routine they had rehearsed before. The house itself seemed to hum with secrecy. Lights inside flickered briefly, and shadows moved across the blinds, confirming that someone else was there despite the mother's denial. Detectives knew they couldn't force entry without a warrant, but every instinct told them the driver was inside, likely hiding just beyond the door. The daughter had vanished from the public eye, but not from her mother's watchful protection. What struck investigators most was the mother's demeanor. There was no sign of fear, no nervous glances. Instead, she carried herself with confidence, as though she believed she could keep the truth contained within her walls. Yet the evidence outside told another story. Tire marks, eyewitnesses, the unmistakable pattern of a car rushing into hiding. What had started as a reckless crash now looked like part of something much more deliberate. Detectives didn't waste time after leaving the cul-de-sac that night. The pieces of the puzzle were already too sharp to ignore. The silver sedan, the tire marks, the mother's calm denial, all of it pointed to a carefully concealed truth waiting behind that garage door. The next morning, investigators secured a warrant and returned to the house. The air was heavy with tension as uniformed officers stepped onto the property, their eyes scanning every corner of the driveway. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, drawn by the flashing lights and the promise of answers to the mystery that had shaken their peaceful street. The garage was the first place searched. When the door creaked open, a blast of stale, hot air escaped, carrying the faint odor of burned rubber and engine oil. Beneath a tarp, poorly hidden in the corner, sat the silver sedan. Its front end was crumpled, flecked with paint from the cars it had struck. Headlights hung at odd angles, one shattered completely. The sight confirmed what everyone already knew. The young woman had come here after the crash, and her mother had tried to shield her. The vehicle was photographed, the tarp dusted for prints, and the evidence carefully catalogued. Still, detectives felt there was more to uncover than just a hidden car. Inside the house, the atmosphere was strangely sterile. Curtains remained closed, dishes sat unwashed in the sink, and the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingered in the air. The daughter was nowhere to be found, but signs of her presence were scattered throughout. A pair of shoes, still flecked with mud, rested by the door, a handbag lay tossed on the couch, and a half-empty water bottle sat on the counter, as if abandoned in haste. The mother repeated her story. She hadn't seen her daughter, hadn't heard the crashes, knew nothing about the damage outside. But the contradictions were glaring. Detectives soon discovered the car wasn't even registered in the daughter's name. The paperwork tied it to the mother, making her not just a bystander, but directly entangled in the crime. That revelation shifted suspicion. Was this truly a daughter's reckless act followed by a mother's blind protection, or was there something larger at play? Some officers began to theorize that the two women worked in unison, the mother covering up mistakes as part of a pattern stretching back further than this single afternoon. As the search continued, neighbors provided more unsettling details. One recalled seeing the mother pacing outside in the minutes before the sedan returned, as though she was waiting for it. Another admitted hearing the garage slam shut with unusual force. These accounts painted a picture of coordination, not coincidence. The theory that this had been rehearsed gained weight. Perhaps the crashes were not simply the result of careless driving, but rather the eruption of deeper frustrations building within the family's private life. For investigators, the case shifted from a hit and run into something more complex. Motive became the central question. The damage to the three cars seemed random, yet the deliberate concealment suggested intent. What were they hiding beyond the wrecked sedan? Each discovery dragged the story further from the realm of accident and closer to something deliberate, calculated, and unsettling. The house no longer looked like a place of safety. It looked like a stage for secrets. The warrant allowed detectives to comb through the garage, the car, and eventually the rooms of the house, and what they uncovered painted a picture far darker than anyone expected. Inside the glove box of the silver sedan, Beneath registration papers and expired insurance cards were envelopes stuffed with overdue bills. Some were months old, stamped in red with warnings of final notice. Mixed in were letters, hand-scrawled and hostile, threatening repossession and legal action. The pile was more than financial stress. It was desperation on paper. The kind of burden that eats away at judgment until rash choices begin to feel like the only option. Suddenly, the string of crashes seemed less like random chaos and more like the violent release of pent-up frustration, an outburst aimed not at specific people, but at the world closing in on them. Upstairs, detectives searched the daughter's room, finding discarded bottles of prescription pills, notebooks filled with messy handwriting, and lists of phone numbers with some angrily scratched out. A pattern of turmoil became clear. She was struggling under weight she could no longer carry. But instead of seeking help, she leaned into the one person who had always protected her, her mother. And the mother in turn seemed willing to cover up even the most reckless of actions, convinced that shielding her daughter was better than letting her face reality. Together they had built a fragile alliance, one that blurred the line between love and enablement. As officers pressed deeper into the investigation, inconsistencies in the mother's story only grew. She insisted she had no idea where her daughter was, but fresh laundry sat folded on the bed, and 2 plates with scraps of food lingered on the dining table, still warm when officers arrived. Somewhere in the hours between the crash and the search, the daughter had been here, hiding, eating, possibly listening as her mother tried to keep detectives at bay. Every clue pointed to a quiet retreat within the walls of this house, a safe haven where accountability was smothered by maternal loyalty. The discovery of the car and the supporting evidence left police with no choice but to act. They arrested the mother for obstruction and impoundment of the vehicle, leading her away in front of stunned neighbors who had once seen her as nothing more than a protective parent. It was a moment that turned whispers of suspicion into undeniable truth. When word spread that the daughter had later been found hiding in a basement closet during a secondary sweep, the story shifted from bizarre to unsettling. She emerged pale, shaken, and defiant, refusing to admit wrongdoing even as the evidence stacked against her. In the end, what had begun as 3 violent crashes on an ordinary street unraveled into the exposure of a secretive bond between a mother and daughter living in the shadow of financial ruin and emotional collapse. The young woman had thought she could run from her mistakes, and the mother had believed she could erase them. But neither could hide from the trail of destruction left behind. The quiet suburban block that had once been unremarkable was now marked forever by the sound of breaking metal, the flashing of police lights, and the reminder that sometimes the greatest cover-ups begin not with criminals, but with those who love too much to let go.